There's an alarm. Could that not have been more perfect? That's saying go on Vanessa's podcast.
And I had set an alarm earlier, but I didn't stop it. So yeah, that was my medication alarm.
Welcome to Real Over Ideal, the podcast where we sometimes have guests who also keep it real. Guests who helped us start this podcast. One place you can definitely be real is therapy. I know this both as a therapist and as someone who's done the work myself. If you could use a down-to-earth, evidence-based perspective, I'd be honored to help. You can reach me anytime at vanessagorelkin.com. The link is in the show notes. Now let's get on with the show. Today I'm welcoming Tracy Otsuka, the host and author of ADHD for Smartass Women, which has released more than 350 episodes and built a global community of women redefining what it means to live with ADHD. Her work has inspired thousands to shift from self-doubt to self-advocacy, proving that ADHD can be a superpower when you stop apologizing for who you are and start being who you are. Today, we're having Tracy on the podcast to talk about some of the pearls of wisdom that she has learned over the years of helping women. Thank you so much to Tracy Otsuka for being a guest today.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about the origin story of my podcast. I don't know how much you are part of that origin story. So the last time I was on your podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women, we were talking about internal family systems. When we finished recording, Tracy said to me, Vanessa, you've got to have your own podcast. The way that you talk about things, the approach, does it sound familiar?
Yeah,
what you said?
This.
And it was just an amazing conversation. It just crystallized thoughts that I had, and I had other people tell me similar. Maybe you ought to do this. But Tracy took it one step further. She gave me some really great ideas about how to start, which is kind of what we're talking about. And I was stuck in the, I can't do this. And you were really effective, so effective that I was like, I think I'm going to do this. So I have to say thank you.
Well, I think one of my gifts, Vanessa, is I can see who people can be, like their best self. And often we can't see it in ourselves. We just again, it's all the fear, all the reasons why we shouldn't do it. I don't say this to everyone, by the way. In fact, I say it very infrequently. There was just something about how you take difficult subjects and you're really good at simplifying them. You have a lot to say. So not only are you putting your gifts out into the world and you're helping other people, but I think podcasting clarifies for us where we want to go next. So it was really clear to me that this woman needs to do this. I really thought, you gave me the impression that, oh my God, I would hate that. And I'm like, I don't think so. I actually think you'd really enjoy it.
Hearing from you, somebody I really respect, I believe in the mission that you're doing because it is such a great thing. I'm a fan. I think that it really brings value.
Thank you very much.
So there's a part of the podcast that we call, If You Try This, You Won't Die. And that's the part of the, yeah, it sounds a little scary, but actually it is the part of the podcast where we ask the guest, in this case, Tracy Otsuka, for a bit of practical advice about our topic, which in Tracy's case is looking for pearls of wisdom from someone with many years of experience in the ADHD world, both herself having ADHD, having authored a book about ADHD, and having a podcast with over 350 episodes about ADHD and talking to people with ADHD. So, do you have one tip that you would offer to my audience? If you try this, you won't die.
This is so important. And I don't know why I'm having a block as far as if you try this, you won't die. If you try anything, you won't die. All you have to do is one tiny little part of it. But I would say before that, is this something you actually want to try? Because what happens to a lot of us with ADHD is, of course, I believe ADHD is not a productivity problem. I believe it's an identity problem. Many of us have gone through life trying to do it their way. Everybody's told you from the time you're little, this is not the right way. This is how you should do it. But that doesn't work for your brain. And we have these interest driven brains. So, this thing that you want to try and that you're not going to die, I assure you, unless you're talking about jumping off a moving helicopter, is this something that you really want to do? And if it is something that is intentional, that you really want to do it for you, not for other people, but for you, just do the first thing. The smallest thing that makes it seem like there's no friction at all. And it might be, you've got to write this email. Just step one is just sit down and open up the email. Often with us, where the friction comes in is the emotion of starting. So I guess I would say if you start, you won't die, but make sure that your start is teeny tiny.
Great suggestion. In other words, if you try to do a tiny part of something that you're making into a huge task, in other words, something that feels really big to your brain, because my experience with ADHD brains, and as you know from me being on your podcast three
Twice?
times.
Oh, 3
I'm
times.
a three-timer. I don't have ADHD myself, but I live with it every day with my son and my husband. And I think they've both learned how to be successful with their ADHD, but it's not without concerns and problems. And sometimes things come up with their brains where it's hard to get started with something. I've seen that a lot. It's a really common issue, I think, that comes up. And I see it often tracing back to perfectionism and anxiety. Sometimes
Yes.
it's one or the other. Usually it's a little, bit of both. And so I think what you're saying is just a really natural way of looking at things that are scary, that, if you try to do something, you won't die, period. Like, that's actually sort of the whole idea of that question. Just to go back, I really enjoy your answer too, because you were stumped for a minute thinking, you don't really try anything and die unless you're jumping off, the Brooklyn Bridge, but
Yeah.
or a bridge.
not
Don't
do
do
that.
that. Let's not jump off bridges. We're not suggesting that. But other than that, if you're not doing something dangerous, if you're going to do something that makes you feel a little silly, maybe practice feeling a little silly, because what is the worst thing that happens with feeling silly? We hopefully can move forward from that.
Yes, and if it is intentional, you're going to be proud of yourself for having done even that little tiny piece. And what we are lacking is dopamine. And so by doing that first little thing, you are spiking your dopamine. So you are teaching yourself how to regulate your own nervous system, because again, that fear of starting, you are not lazy, you are not undisciplined, you are not stupid, you're not slow. It really is the emotion of starting that can be so difficult for us. The way we start is different than a neurotypical. So a neurotypical has a thought, I want to start. Okay. They feel good because they want to start and they get into action. We do it backwards. The first thing we need to do is movement. We need to get into action, just starting that little thing. And then that getting into action, that movement triggers an emotion. I'm proud of myself. And then comes the thought after, yeah, I can do this. And because I could do this, I can do the next thing. So I always think of it as, I think of myself as I'm an airplane and I'm on a runway and I have to get myself off of that runway. And the way I get myself off the runway is to do that first little thing. It spikes dopamine. I can do this. I'm going to do the next thing, and so on and so forth. We're not defective. We're not disordered. Our brains just work using a different operating system.
I have definitely heard the expression, the motivation is in the doing. And
Yeah.
so, sure enough, if you're sitting around waiting to be motivated, that is a sure way to continue to sit around. And I know that it is very hard. That is not to make it seem like it's easy to stop that sort of freeze response that people get into when they're afraid to start for a variety of reasons. But it is true that the motivation is in the doing. Do the thing, start in the middle, as I have said on various occasions. Get going, because then you are going to be producing those neurotransmitters inside of your brain and actually getting your circulation going, and you're going to be breathing and getting more oxygen. I mean, there's a lot of physiology here that we could turn to if we were really trying to figure out a little bit more about what's the fundamentals of that excellent tip. So I appreciate that.
Vanessa, can I give you my biggest tip that has never not worked for me in 7 years? And I've never had a client or student I've worked with where it hasn't worked.
The title of the podcast is Pearls of Wisdom with Tracy Otsuka. So hit me up with all of your
I'm wearing
pearls of
pearls.
wisdom.
My mama's. Okay, so you're just talking about how you're sitting there and you're struggling to start. And we know that the goal is to get into action, right? But that's easier said than done, as you mentioned. The best way to do that is to get out of your head and start. Okay, but how do you do that? So I am holding up a cube. It is called the time cube. This thing sits on my desk. If I am struggling to start, I'm trying to talk myself out of starting. First thing I do is I see this time cube on my desk. And all I do is I turn it on its side. Now, for those that aren't watching, is this on video too?
It's going to be on video, so
Okay.
people can see it
But for
on
those who are
YouTube.
listening, so it's a cube and there's 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes on either side. But when you flip it over, the timer starts automatically. So there is no resistance. It's not like I've got to go find a kitchen timer or I've got to go on my phone and find a timer. This makes it so easy. So it gets me out of my brain because it's like, you don't have any choice. Just turn that thing over. And this is the deal I've struck with myself. All you have to do is 25 minutes. If you want to stop after 25 minutes, be my guest. Do you know in 7 years, I have never stopped? Because once, the way the ADHD brain works, once we start, well, let me back up. We struggle to start, but once we start, we struggle to stop. So I've never had this not work. And once people start using it, it is the perfect strategy for when, you don't want to do that thing that you know you need to start. Because what's happening is once you get through 25 minutes, your dopamine is sky high. You are totally proud of yourself. And then you're able to use another benefit of ADHD, hyperfocus, to keep going. So in general, when I use this, I don't stop for 2 hours or until the task is done.
From the non-ADHD perspective, I do use my phone and I go to my timer and I do timer roulette. I don't know if you know, like, iPhone timers, if you just like kind of slide your finger on the timer, it'll go from 1 minute to 60. And wherever it stops is the number of minutes I have before I have to start doing a task. It doesn't bother me to start it that way. And it's certainly a tip that others could try if they don't want to get the time cube. I have a question and answer section of the podcast called Untangle This. And that's the part of the podcast where I answer questions that come in to me, or when I'm having a guest like Tracy Otsuka, I choose a question that I think would really match for them. And the question is, what is the best way, or what is your favorite way to handle time blindness?
My gosh. Okay, so this is something I really struggle with. A lot of people with ADHD have time blindness. It is why we are so curious and creative, and time, it's almost like it's not even there. And that's what allows us to just, again, be so creative. But what that means is I can literally schedule something and forget that I scheduled it an hour later. It is literally, it's like poof and it's gone. And so one of the things that I have done, my Apple Watch or smartwatch, it is what guides me. I forget if I put wash in the laundry to get it out. I mean, I can wash laundry 3 times. I will forget that I'm cooking. And all of a sudden, literally, one time, I was conducting a training and I started to smell burning. And I'm actually in a great room right now. I had an office upstairs, but I don't like to be up there all by myself. So I made a little corner of our great room into my office and where I come live. And I literally smelt something burning. And I peeked around over to where the kitchen was, and there was a pot literally on fire. So I have a real problem with time blindness. In that specific case, what would I do? What would I do differently? Well, first of all, I mean, it's just, I'm always using my watch. So I am setting things continually, even something as silly as I'm just boiling water for tea, which is probably what I was doing at that time. I will literally set a 5-minute timer. So there's a reminder that I'm boiling water because I will forget. Estrogen modulates dopamine. So what happens is if you already have ADHD, your estrogen levels are lower. Then you go into perimenopause, they get even lower. And so all of a sudden, this brain that you actually could rely on ceases to function. And so you may be in a situation where you're like, I don't even understand who I am anymore because everything that I thought was true is no longer true. So I call that maturity onset ADHD. You always had the symptoms. As a child, I was a really good student. You know, girls tend to be people pleasers. And I noticed or realized that, okay, I'm reasonably smart and I get a lot of attention when I do well in school. And so I would do really well in school. I'd get really good grades, even though I had to work harder than everybody else. But I always got in trouble for talking. I was constantly being moved. I was very hyperactive. I was super entrepreneurial and very curious and probably kind of annoying because I found it hard to fit in with everybody else. You know, I was always looking for, frankly, ways to challenge the status quo. Why do I have to do it this way? What if I did it this way? And today, even for me, I'm all about how do we make this thing better? How do we change this thing so it works differently in a better way?
I think that with perimenopause and menopause, people's brain capabilities shift and change. There's a lot of discussion of brain fog and moods and things like that. So whether it is this adult onset of ADHD or some other brain change, and the medical perspective of ADHD is that it's present in childhood and often not diagnosed in women. Interesting concepts there. Your perspective on ADHD is we don't necessarily have to call it a disorder. It's a different way of existing. It's a different way of being. It's kind of an interesting perspective to consider. You know, there is one thing that's on your podcast that I am a little bit more wary of. It's okay to have it, but I have been trying to explain to people, I think that we want to be careful about lived experience without any training being considered to be expertise. Like you're an expert in yourself, but just
Anecdotal.
because, right, like it's an anecdotal, exactly. Like I'm a scientist, I'm an occupational therapist, I have a master's degree, 30 years of experience. I don't know everything in the world, but I know what I know, and I've, done my continuing education over time. And there are coaches who are really well prepared and capable and have done a lot of work and training. Like I would include you in that group, Tracy. I mean, you have a book that's really well researched, that you sought out a lot of experts to speak with for your book. You have done a lot of learning over time. You're not just like showing up because I have ADHD and I think I can like explain how I go ahead and do things. It's hardly like that. But there are people who are out there who just sort of put out a shingle and they're very good at marketing themselves. But at the end of the day, they're giving a lot of chat GPT advice. A little scary. So anyway, I think that everyone needs to understand that podcasts are just people talking, and you want to know who is talking and what you're listening to, and then take everything with a grain of salt if it's not your individual medical provider.
I'd like to respond to your last comment. I absolutely agree. However, what I also want to offer is that I believe for decades, the scientists and the experts have gotten it wrong. And so, yeah, you can't just hang out a shingle and not like I've always been based in science, always looking at what the experts said. But over the years that I've done this, I've also worked with thousands of women with ADHD, and I've seen these consistent patterns over and over again. And so I just cannot believe it's a disorder because I have never met. Sure, there are things about ADHD. Like if you told me you can have all the gifts you have, but you can also have great working memory. Are you kidding me? Of course I would take that. So I don't think ADHD is a superpower, but I do believe that if you learn how to work with it, there is brilliance in you that you don't even know exists. So you come over and you listen to my podcast, you are going to feel better after because you're going to slowly start to realize that no, my brain is not disordered. It is just different. And there are different strategies that are going to work for me. And when women really, really struggle, it is always because underlying the ADHD is also trauma. And beyond just the trauma, the little cuts every day of teachers saying nasty things and other students and your parents, which that's trauma too, right? But I'm talking about, developmental trauma, childhood trauma.
Yeah, I think that it's a really touchy subject. I think that depending on who is listening, what I wouldn't want to take away is that somebody says, well, Tracy says, oh, I don't necessarily think this is a disorder. Then the difficulties or the issues that you're having are somehow invalid. I don't think you're saying that. At the end of the day, if you're struggling, whether you're going to call it a disorder or difficulty or being neurodivergent, which I think is fair to say, right? Because there is neurotypical kind of way of being. I don't consider myself to be neurotypical either, but more because of my own personal sensitivities. Like I have a sensory sensitive nervous system, loud noises, upsetting things like that. That's hard for me. I cannot function well when I am tired in a very intense way. So I think there's neurotypical and there's neurodivergent, and I think that there's a continuum. And so I would call it, if you're not going to call it necessarily a disorder, you might call it neurodivergent from what our society has decided what is needed, right? We need the little girls who stand in two lines, and we need the boys who can color within the lines, and who are always going to go and be just doing exactly the G.I. Joe game, and that's what's fun for them. Anything else is sort of outside of what the norms are, and that's where we get into trouble. Because what we do is we discount a whole swath of society that has creativity and capability that goes beyond anything that those people who follow the rules are like, right? Yeah. And so that's rough. And so I guess what the question that we're addressing here is, what's good about being neurodivergent? What's good about, what are the pearls of wisdom about saying it's good to have be a different type of individual? I guess that would be the question I would ask back to you then. Like, okay, so you're a little different. What's really great about that?
Well, I think first and foremost, creativity. We are typically not the kinds of people who are just going to take things the way they are. We are always, part of the reason why we seem like we can be all over the place is because our brains kind of are. They're taking in everything all at once. And there's research that's been done that people who are very linear in their thinking tend to come up with whatever problem they're trying to solve in advance. They're like, oh, well, this is going to happen. And whatever we focus on grows, right? So if that's what you believe, that's exactly what they get. Versus people that have this brain that is more creative and maybe a little bit out there, they are the ones that come up with different answers, different responses, different ways of solving a problem because they're open to everything. Creativity, of course, that goes with curiosity. I don't know about you, but I would much rather be around people that are curious of their surroundings and why things happen and, could it be, our social structures that are causing all these problems down the road? Or no, is it always about discipline and character and it's a moral failing? And what kind of messages are we sending to our kids who are really trying so hard, but are then told that, oh, no, it's because you're not trying hard enough? When they're doing everything that they can and they just need to try differently. We tend to be lifelong learners because we're curious. We are not the kind of people who punch a clock at 9 a.m., punch out at 5, do this for 30 years without questioning, and then ride off into the sunset of retirement. No, we are the kind of people who typically we're like, I'm never going to retire. There's always something to be done. There's always, if I'm volunteering or I'm building a new business, we tend to be highly entrepreneurial. We tend to be risk takers, which is why we tend to be highly entrepreneurial. We are very mission driven. We need to know that our work is making a difference in someone or something's life, and we are highly empathetic. Which all of those things, I mean, wouldn't you want a person to be like that? Okay, maybe they're late. Maybe they, are the kind of people that are always asking why and don't quite fit in. But, in my mind, from what I've seen of all the women that I've worked with, we aren't meant to fit in. Every single woman that I've met, I would say she's born to lead. And the problem is she's been trying to fit in. And if she could just find what she's meant to lead in, that she's really interested in, sky's the limit. A lot of, I'm going to say women because that's who I work with, a lot of women with ADHD struggle in school. And so if from a young age, you're struggling in school, you think you're not very smart, you can't compete, you just start to believe that it's all the shame, right? You're not good at anything. And that is far from the truth. I mean, I just talked to a woman who just signed up for our program, and she's 31 years old. She has 2 kids, and she's tried a couple jobs, but because she couldn't get through school, there are these kind of menial jobs that is what is hardest for us to do, right? It's the kind of work, like I'm just throwing this out, like a, barista at Starbucks. She's like, I can't even work in a coffee shop. Like, I can't even do that job. How can I do anything more than that? Well, the problem is she's doing a job that is really boring to her. It's the same thing every day. It's like Groundhog Day. It never ends. There's nothing to be curious about. Thankfully, she's a people person, so at least she can talk to other people. But that is really the problem. She's not doing enough. But because she struggled in school, a lot of doors closed to her, and she thought, oh, that means I'm just not smart and I can't do anything.
You're kind of pointing out a few different real issues that come up, I think, in our current world. And I see some changes that may be important right now, especially with looking at maybe non-traditional educational environments or educational paths. I mean, my son's most likely going to be getting a PhD in history. That's where he's headed. And, he didn't really finish high school in a typical way because that just wasn't for him. I mean, it was during the pandemic, and the way that things went, it just really wasn't working for him to be doing school online the way it was being offered, and it wasn't a good environment for him. The other thing, I mean, again, and this is my anecdotal experience, but not only with my husband and son, but with people in my practice, and that is the incredible problem identifiers in ADHD environments, like people who can really see patterns that
Yes.
for example,
I
myself.
forgot pattern recognition. Forgot about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, my husband, I may have even said this story when I've talked to you another time, but my husband knew that a hospital that I was working in was going to close well before I did because we were at a party, some sort of cocktail event, and we were with a bunch of executives. And when I asked them a question like, oh, what do you think about the fate of this hospital? He saw the body language. I just went right past it. He picked it up, and the way that they were talking to me and answering me, he is really, really skilled and capable like that. Now, I'm not saying everybody with ADHD is exactly like that. He's an investigator and an analyst by profession. So that's where he took his skills. And I think, if anything, I didn't ask you this question. This will be my last one because I know that you have to get going.
Oh my God, if
on
we
your
talk,
trip.
I could talk to you forever.
It is good to talk to you. What was I going to say? Oh my gosh, I totally lost my train. See, it's happening again. I lost my
Your
train of thought.
husband, and it was about interpersonal intuition. That is probably one of our biggest skills.
Yeah.
That ability to walk into a room and read, like you said, the body language and just the energy. You don't even really know these people. You don't really know what's going on, but you can sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think when you're in something like me and you're kind of depending on it or whatever, it's very hard to see the forest because you're looking at the trees, and he always sees the trees, right? So, and again, I don't really think that my son the same way. My son looks at things in a way, he explains things to me now. He's 21, and he's like, Mom, don't you know that blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, no, I actually really never looked at it like that. I have all the facts that you have, but you have put it together in this beautiful way. And I think, it is one of the real, you said that ADHD is not a superpower. And I know that it really angers some people when you call ADHD a superpower. I don't have the right to call it a superpower, but I will say that some people can use their ADHD
Yeah.
as a type of superpower. I get that there are struggles. I think the thing that is my mission in my work and in your work, same thing, is to help people with ADHD to be able to embrace what's difficult and say, okay, how am I going to adapt to that? And then embrace who they are and say, here are the things that I'm awesome at that the neurotypicals are really not very good at all. And so I think that that is a really, really critical thing that we get to leave the audience with. And actually that this podcast is not only about ADHD, but I have definitely talked about ADHD topics because they fit right in with, life in general. And I think they also apply to human beings, not just people with ADHD, so you can relate. But I think the mission of working with people with ADHD and assuring that their contributions get into the world is really important. And so I guess that would be my final question for you, which is if somebody out there is listening and struggling because they have ADHD and they're not sure how to get up and going in a world that does not seem to fit for them. I know this is a big question, but what sort of steps might you suggest to someone who's feeling alienated from the world by their ADHD?
So again, this is the work that I do. And it is all about identity. Often people with ADHD, they don't know what is truly important to them. They don't know what they really value. They don't know what their natural born strengths are. And I'm talking strengths that they're practicing today. They can't help but practice these strengths. They're as natural to them as breathing. They don't know what talents they have that they built skills around and actually turned into superpowers, because there is always a superpower associated with ADHD. I just don't think
A
you can
superpower.
blanket say this is, a superpower. No, you need to
I
figure
think
out
that's
how
a
to
good
work
way
with
of
it.
that is a great way to put it. So in other words, there are people with ADHD have their own superpowers that they have to identify rather than it being a superpower, right?
Yes. I always say I have never met a woman with ADHD, and I've met thousands, that isn't truly brilliant at something. And I am talking about women who have come to me that have been addicted to meth. I am talking about women who have been homeless and they were calling me from their car. Every single one of them. There is a brilliance. And so it behooves you to figure out, where is that? So you look at, we have a lot of passions. We tend to be curious. We're interested in a lot of things, which is what makes it feel like we can be all over the place. So really honing in on the sweet spot between all the things I just mentioned and then that passion. Of all those passions you have, which is the passion that really drives you? It comes from a place of empathy, and it's connected to your purpose, because I believe purpose is just one of your passions with a side of service attached. So who are
Mhm.
you going to help? What cause are you going to get behind? And so wherever that sweet spot is, where they all intersect, if you do work in that sweet spot, you are going to have few, if maybe none, of the executive function deficits that you have in all these other areas that you're trying to, I need to do this thing because my dad wanted me to be a dentist, or my mother wanted me to do this, or my partner wants me to do that. It really has to be, we're not neurotypical. We can't just do stuff because people want us to do it. We
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
to really feel it. There has to be intention behind it. And then once we're in that sweet spot, the sky is the limit. It happens so fast. It's actually shocking how quickly it happens once we understand who we are and what we're meant to do with our life, because our entire life we've wondered, I know I'm a little different, and I know I'm meant to do big things, but what is that thing? I don't know.
Yeah. I think that that is so true. It is just to say, I literally have two stories in my own personal life with my family, both of which really illustrate that point very well. And it's just funny that you should say it like that. My husband, who's an investigator, he was doing other things before I met him, and then ultimately was finishing up a school program and went back and actually did career testing and found the career testing reminded him that being in law enforcement or being an analyst was really what he had wanted to do since he was in second grade. And once he figured that out, and he had gone off on a completely different path, once he figured that out, he just went like, it was like gangbusters.
Right.
You could not stop him. It was hyper focus before I realized what hyper focus was. He was just completely, there was no stopping him. He was going to do this.
And let me put a point on what you just said. He knew this from the time he was in second grade, before society tried to turn him into who he wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And himself and his own expectations, which were not that or whatever. I don't know what really drew him away. Partially was really struggling to be like neurotypical in school because he was not. And my son always has loved history since, I don't know, since he was maybe in fourth or fifth grade, maybe even younger. And he's going to get a PhD in history because we as parents, fortunately, have been able to recognize, like, if we, help him to turn up the degree on that passion, he will always be doing something he loves. And so he's going to be able to find a career that matches that. I think he wants to go into archiving and teaching and writing, whatever he's going to do. He'll be, I'm going to knock on wood, be a success at it because it's his passion. And to the listeners, both from me and Tracy, I think I can speak for both of us saying that finding your passion is everything. Believing in your passion and moving towards it will take you really, really far. But I want to give the last word to Tracy as we sign off because I'm so grateful to get any of your time. Always, I love to talk to you, and I feel the same way. We could talk all day, but what would you like to leave the listeners with as far as encouragement about ADHD, encouragement living in a neurotypical world as a neurodivergent person? Any last final sign-off thoughts?
I would always recommend looking for the positive emotion. We have this rudder inside of ourselves, and this is especially for ADHD. When we are in positive emotion, again, sky's the limit. When we're in negative emotion, can't get out of bed, can't get anything done. So whatever you're doing, you've got that rudder, pay attention to how you feel. If you feel positive emotion, do more of that. If you feel negative emotion, that is the best sign to, you know what, I need to be trying something different.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I so appreciate you being a guest on Real Over Ideal podcast with me, Vanessa Gorelkin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted that you finally did this.
Thank you.